All right, our 3 o'clock speaking slot. Doug Burns, Nick Whitis. So Doug, been in InfoSec for 5 years, has a passion for sharing information, making other people better, primarily interested in malware analysis, red team, and CTF. And Nick is a senior security analyst on a vulnerability management cyber threat team and a red team, and is a GPEN certified, a couple GPENs in the house. Anybody else got GPENs in here? Any SANS folks? Yeah? Okay. There's a few. And is a gamer. A good hobby and pastime. So, yeah. Give it up for Doug Burns and Nick Whitis.
All right. Hi. This is password auditing for the enterprise. So, we'll get started. Maybe. There it is. All right, off to a good start. So to rehash, because we like talking about ourselves, I'm Doug Burns, at DougSec on Twitter if you care. Lead security analyst at a place I can't talk about because they said no. InfoSec, interested in malware analysis, red team, love CTF, and again, love sharing information. So I won't claim to know everything, but I know a little about a lot of stuff. So if you have any questions that I can help out with, please reach out to me. If I don't have the answers, then hopefully I can find somebody that does have the answers. I just want to make you better and the industry in general better. So with that said, this is Nick.
Hi, I'm Nick. I'm a senior security analyst at Redacted. I focus on vulnerability management, cyber threat team, and on the cyber threat team I focus more on the red team side of the house. I'm a GPEN certified pen tester. I'm an avid gamer, and in a past life, I used to be an SCCM engineer, focusing on system configuration and operating system deployment.
All right, so kind of a disclaimer here. If you're expecting like bleeding edge research, not going to happen. We don't have any 0 days. All the work that we're doing is really standing on the shoulders of giants. So you're going to see a lot of references up here. We're going to have a lot of blog posts, a lot of links, a lot of GitHubs. Absolutely, the encouragement here is to go to those places, read these resources that we also read, and check it out. So that being said, go ahead and talk about where we're going to go. So why audit passwords? That's what we're going to start out with. Why should you care about this, right? We're all busy. Everybody's got other stuff to do. Who even cares about auditing passwords, right? It's going to cost you thousands of dollars, and you're going to spend days and days at it, and maybe you'll get 3 passwords, and nobody's going to care, right? Probably not. We'll talk about it. Then we'll talk about how do you do it, right? So we'll go through a brief tutorial, talk to you about, at least on the Windows side, right? So Linux side is a little bit easier. You have your root account, you copy down the shadow account, crack your hashes, off to the races. Windows, it's a little bit more complicated than that, so we'll go through a process and talk to you about how to get the hashes, how to decrypt the hashes once you've got the hashes, and then some kind of tools and techniques to use to crack the hashes once you've acquired them. Then we'll talk about hardware. So this can really be done on a number of different hardware platforms, right? So this can be done on a VM on the laptop that you use for everyday work, or you can scale it up all the way and spend tens of thousands of dollars if you want to. Then we'll talk about presenting your findings, right? So that's the important thing. You have to make other people care about your findings. We can spend all day cracking passwords and telling our buddies, hey, I cracked 70% of the passwords. But if you're not talking to management, if you're not talking to departments, nobody's going to care, and your work's really going to be for nothing. So we're going to talk about presenting your findings, who should you talk to, what should you talk to them about, and then we'll do tales from the depths. So we'll talk about some of the stuff that we've seen during the course of our password audits, some kind of got-yous when you get involved in something like this, and just some funny stories that we have of people with their passwords. So, all right. So we stole a meme from the guy before. So why audit passwords? Number one, your passwords suck. Tell me your company name, tell me your OWA link, and I will log into it almost guaranteed. There are a couple passwords that you see all the time. Everybody's using them. I don't know where this idea came from, but apparently it's a very pervasive idea that you should use certain things in passwords, and people have latched onto it, and everybody's doing it. Maybe everybody thinks they're unique. Maybe that's why they're doing it. Oh, nobody's ever thought about this before. I'm going to do this. Yeah, everybody's doing that. So number one, that's the real reason. Your passwords are terrible. Second, let's kind of survey the crowd here. Like, of everybody that's in here, who does an annual pen test? Okay, cool. How about, no, keep your hands up, keep your hands up. So if you don't do an annual pen test, who's had money in the slush fund in the last 5 or 10 years and you've done a pen test? Okay. So of those pen tests that you've done, put your hand down if there wasn't a finding that was related to passwords. Right, so nobody's putting their hands down. That's the thing. We're paying pen testers tens of thousands of dollars to come into our networks and crack passwords. We could be doing that work ourselves and be getting more rich pen tests, but instead we have crappy passwords on our network. The pen testers come in, they do a couple of different attacks, which I'm going to talk about in a few seconds. They crack the passwords and they're in. That's it, right? So we should be challenging pen testers. We're going to pay them tens of thousands of dollars to attack our network. They should be struggling. They should have a hard time with this. But just in a survey of pen testers that I know that do this professionally on a consulting basis, they're quoting statistics as far as like 90 to 95% of their engagements involve cracking hashes of some kind. So if we make those hashes next to impossible to crack, then that's going to make their job a lot harder. Maybe we encourage Red Team to get better. Maybe we encourage the pen tester to find more interesting findings than just, oh, I cracked the hash. Oh, I cracked your admin hash. Whatever. So let's make other people be better too. So what are pen testers using? Password spraying, right? So the way this works, if you're not familiar, I'm going to take a publicly accessible portal that you've got. Maybe it's OWA, maybe it's a VPN, something like that. And I know through my course of pen testing that these are the 3 passwords that are generally most used. Maybe it's 2. Let's go 2. So these 2 passwords are generally found in most organizations. So I'm going to compile the biggest user list that I can, and I'm going to send those 2 passwords for every user in your organization. And your detection tools probably aren't going to see this. Unless you're correlating failed logons across multiple accounts, which is a pretty hard thing to correlate, you're not really going to be able to set off an alarm for 2 failed logons for a user. So especially if I spread this out and I'm doing like 5 user chunks every 30 minutes, it's going to be almost impossible to detect. So, but through the course of that, because everybody's using the same passwords, I'm going to get in. I'm going to get logged into OWA. I'm going to create a rule that's going to give me persistence back to the root machine. I'm going to get logged into your VPN and have network access. So that's a big thing. Having weak passwords is going to make you susceptible to password spraying. Secondly, is Responder. So Spider Labs came out with a pretty nasty tool here. Basically, this exploits a vulnerability in Microsoft domain resolution. So Microsoft had this great idea, like, oh, we should take some stress off of the DNS servers, and some other people are already doing these queries. So before we query the DNS server, let's just ask our friends and see if anybody else has queried this name recently. Well, that's fine. That's cool. So I'm going to run Responder. I'm going to be that friend. And I'm just going to tell you that I'm that. I'm your file server. I'm your domain controller. I'm whatever you're looking for. And you're going to send me your hash, and I'm going to say, oh, that's great. And I'm going to send it wherever you want to go. You get logged onto the file system, and I've intercepted your hash. Now I'm going to crack your hash, get logged onto your machine, and move laterally throughout the network. It is worth noting, this is, you do have to already have an internal foothold for Responder to work. So this is going to be a lateral movement once they've gotten inside through something like password spraying or phishing, more likely. The third and final note of why audit passwords is password compromise, right? So password compromise is in the news everywhere, right? Everybody sees LinkedIn. Everybody sees these giant, massive mega breaches. I think I got an email the other day that said I was part of a breach of like 500 million users or something like that. It's just disgusting, the volume and the size of these breaches. And it just seems like they come month to month to month to month. The problem, I mean, generally there is like a 3-year lead time. I don't necessarily know why that exists, but it seems like between the time of the breach and the time that the passwords are released, there's about a 3-year lead time. So you think, oh, that's great. Well, if somebody was reusing a password, then they've probably changed it in 3 years, right? Well, maybe. But the problem is, maybe they were using Hippopotamus 1 as their password 3 years ago, but now they've rotated up to Hippopotamus 13. Well, you're no more secure because they're using Hippopotamus 13 rather than Hippopotamus 1, because based on the nature of techniques of password cracking, I'm going to get Hippopotamus 13 just as fast as Hippopotamus 1. So if I can get that root password and do some transforms on it, then I'm going to have a better idea of like being able to crack your passwords. So hopefully that makes sense. It's a good use case about why you should even care about this. So now I'm going to hand this off to Nick, and he'll talk a little bit about how you actually get this done.
All right. So like Doug said, we're not doing anything groundbreaking here. This is all kind of state of the art. Just this is what you do when you crack passwords. So now that we've convinced you that you should probably be cracking your own passwords to get more out of your pen test, let's talk a little bit about how you go about it. The first thing we need to know is that in an Active Directory environment, all of the hashes are stored on the domain controller in the Active Directory database. So the first thing we need to do is dump all of them. So there's a few ways that we can do this. The first and probably the most effective way is to use NTDS util. It's built in. It's just there. There's nothing to install. I don't have to worry about AV triggering on it. That being said, we've seen attackers use this. So blue team, you should probably have advanced logging turned on and be alerting when you see this thing fire. So what that will do, and we're specifically looking at the IFM, which is an install for media function. So what this is going to do is it's going to create a backup copy of your Active Directory database, along with everything that you need to install it on another domain controller, which includes the system and security registry hives, which is what you're going to actually use to decrypt all the user accounts in a later step. Another way that you could do this is using like VSS admin to either access already existing shadow copies or to create your own and then move them off. So the next step is decrypting the hashes. So now that you have your DIT file and your two security keys or hives, you need to decrypt the accounts that are inside there. So again, we have a few different ways that we can go about this. One of these is NTDS extract. So this consists of two different things. You've got the Easy Database Export tool, EasyDB export. So what this thing is going to do is you're going to feed it your DIT file, and what it's going to do is put all the tables into a working directory so that you can use your dsusers.py script to grab all of the user accounts and decrypt them with your system hive. The other one that you can use is the impdump.py method. So the extract.sh script was customized and written by Harmjoy. We talked about him in an earlier talk. You might have heard of Will. He worked on PowerShell Empire, Veil Framework, and now Bloodhound, I believe. So what he did with this is extract.sh only pulls out the tables that you need to get password hashes and user accounts. So it runs a little faster, it's cleaner. This is my preferred method if it works. Your mileage may vary with some of these. That's why I'm listing two of them. I've had some Active Directory backups not extract with one or either of these methods, so you'd have to kind of toggle between the two. It's okay if you have to do that. It's not going to affect the results of your audit at all. It's just a different way to do the same thing. So once you've ran your extract.sh, you will extract the hashes with impdump.py. Same concept. You feed it the system registry hive and your tables, and it dumps it into a hash file that you're going to feed into the tool to crack the passwords. And also, I have a link to his blog here. This was really helpful when I first started doing password cracking. So I recommend a read if you're going to get into the business. So cracking, that's our next step. So now that we have everything we need to crack the passwords, we need to decide on what tool we're going to use. So once again, there's many different things we can use to do this. The first one I'm going to talk about is John the Ripper. So if you're just starting off to do this, John the Ripper can be run on pretty much anything. You can run it on a VM, CPU only. That being said, it's kind of legacy at this point because Hashcat's got the ability to utilize GPUs, and just performance-wise, it gets outpaced. There is something to be said about functionality here, or utility, in the fact that John the Ripper is actually capable of extracting hashes from password-protected files, Excel files, Word files, what have you. And then there's the Hashcat. So Hashcat can use either the CPU or the GPU. That being said, like I mentioned before, it superseded John as a primary tool for cracking passwords. So whereas you have John who can access the 12 cores maybe of a CPU, Hashcat can access all the CUDA cores on a graphics card, which could be thousands. and that's where you get your performance increase from the parallel processing. I feel like this had a higher learning curve for people who were trying to get into it, but it's more feature-rich, and the online documentation is fantastic. Anything that you could try to do with Hashcat is listed out there. I have a link to their wiki there. Recommend a read. And for most of the purposes of this talk, we used Hashcat once we had a GPU. All right, so let's talk about the different approaches that we can take with these tools. The first one is dictionaries. So there's a variety of dictionaries, but the general purpose or methodology that Hashcat uses with these is you have a file that has a bunch of words in it, and what it does is it runs those words through the password hashing process and gets a hash. What that then does is compares that hash to the list of hashes in your hash file that you've dumped from your Active Directory. If it gets a match, it displays that on the screen, and voila, you've cracked your first password. So word lists are exactly what they sound like. They're just lists of words, nothing special, apple, potato, whatever. A few good word lists that we have found are the mega list. That's like 3 1-gig files. It's a ridiculous amount of words, but it's fantastic. The idea behind the word list is you apply rules to them, which I'll talk about in a little bit, which will actually mangle them and extend the amount of guesses that Hashcat gets from the list. The second type is cracked passwords. So this is your leaked passwords. LinkedIn breach. RockU is kind of like the bread and butter of password crackers. You start there. It's a condensed list. It's like 2 million words. So even if you're running on just CPUs, it doesn't take forever to get through, even with rules. And it's unbelievable the amount of passwords that it gets right out the gate and that people are still using. Megatron's a little bit bigger. It's kind of like Megarist. It's several files. What's cool about Hashcat is you can specify a directory, so you just dump all of Megatron into a directory, give it a rule, and it'll just churn through each of those in line. There's also custom word lists. There's a tool that you can use called Cool, and what that does is it will crawl a website that you feed it, say your company's website, grab all the plain text words it can find, dump those into a word list so that it can use with rules or what have you. And again, you're going to be surprised at how many people in accounting decide that their password should be accountant1 or accountant2. Along with the custom is as you crack passwords and you go through multiple audits, you should be taking all the passwords that you're cracking and dumping them into a new word list and using those on future password audits, because you're going to have people who have slight alterations on their passwords. You're going to have repeat offenders that don't even change their password even if you notify them. It's just good practice to do that. And then there's the rule sets. So like I mentioned, you could apply rules to these word lists to further extend the amount of guesses you're getting out of them. So Hashcat's got a variety of built-in word lists that are fantastic. And I mean, really, you can do entire password audits on just those. CoreLogic has also published their rule lists that they use for when they crack passwords. Those are a little bit more extensive and resource heavy, so just keep that in mind if you're going to try to use them. So password cracking continued. Another type of attack is a combinator attack. So the idea behind this is you take 2 word lists and you have a left word list and a right word list, and Hashcat will take a word from each of those line by line, combine them into a password, and attempt to crack passwords with it. So what this does is it kind of extends out of just the single word passwords, and you get multiple word passwords. People think, oh, I've got 2 words in it, and it's perfectly secure. No, this gets a crazy amount of passwords, like more than I would have thought when I did it. I was like, oh, we get a few, but no, it gets all kinds. You can also insert delimiters in between the words, like an underscore, a hyphen, any special characters, digits, to get even more. And then there's brute force. So brute force is probably the most time-consuming and resource-intensive attack that's available to Hashcat. And the reason for that is you're trying every single character combination in every single slot in a password. So you're trying just anything you can think of, and it takes forever depending on how long it gets. Really, you can only do this if you're using GPUs, and even then, there's a certain point where it just becomes impossible to crack things. And then you'll get into other techniques that you can kind of try to lower the character space. And that's what mask attacks are for. So mask attacks are, you think of it as targeted brute forcing. So really, brute forcing the entire 10 character space is not a small feat. But on the current rig that we have, we can do it in just a few days with the right mask. So the idea behind it is, instead of trying everything everywhere, you look at all the passwords that you've cracked previously using dictionaries, what have you, combination attacks, and then you find the patterns, right? So, for instance, in 90% of all of the passwords that we cracked that had an uppercase character, that uppercase character was in the first position. So if we were going to create our mask, it makes our first character easy. Uppercase, bang U, or question mark U. So Hashcat has built-in character sets like this, and they're separated out when you go to do your mask by the question marks. So U is for uppercase, L is for lowercase, D is for digit, S is for special. And you can also create your own custom character sets if you want to further reduce the space, say like from in special characters. Since that's like 33 characters, that's a lot to add to any one slot. Adds a lot of time, but if you have the most common specials, you can reduce your cracking time even further. Then we noticed that directly after an uppercase, most often it was a series of lowercase characters. So that makes our next few easy. So we'll add 5 lowercase characters after the uppercase. Then we noticed at the end of most of the passwords, it was a variety, right? So there was digits, so people had years, people had exclamation points, @ signs, what have you. So we decided, let's try a variety of things. At the end, we've been pretty confined in the beginning of the password. We can afford to do this. So what that'll do at the end is it'll try all lowercase, and it'll try digits and specials, and it'll rotate up through all of those. So a way you can generate these masks in a reasonable way is using a tool called PACK. It's the Password Analysis and Cracking Kit. So what you do with PACK is you feed it all of the cracked passwords that you've gotten so far from the POP file, which is where Hashcat stores all of its passwords as it cracks them. And what it'll do is it'll spit out something that looks like this. So what you can do is take this and kind of find where they overlap. So you can come up with a middle ground between character spaces covered and time it takes to crack them. Doing these mask attacks, we tried wiping the POT file several times and running different attacks to see how many we could get with each attack. Mask attacks, with the right set of mask attacks, we were able to replicate anything that we got from most of the things that we got from dictionaries, except for the really long ones. Brute force, it pretty much does the same thing. It's just targeted, right? So we got most of those. They're very powerful. So once you get to a certain length, even mask attacks get hard. But you could also do these hybrid dictionary attacks and mask attacks. So it's kind of like, instead of brute forcing a huge character password, you can start with a dictionary or end with a dictionary. In this example, I just took the mask that we created in the previous slide and added, say, a dictionary with a bunch of years in it, so we didn't have to brute force 4 extra characters. So it would run in roughly the same time that the 10-character mask attack would, but you'd also get 14-character passwords, because in most of the time when a password had 4 digits at the end, or 4 digits, it was all at the end. So we just tacked that on the end, and we got a crazy amount of passwords from it. You could also do that, like I said, the other way, and have just a dictionary, and then at the end you can say, well, I want to try LDS in the last 4 places, and you'll probably get even more passwords. It can go either way. You're just effectively extending the reach of your brute force without drastically increasing your time. So once you start doing this over and over again, you're kind of going to get into a rhythm. The first thing you probably do is going to do a word list because it's the easiest thing to do. It's the most common thing to do. If you're in a word list, the password's probably pretty bad anyway. You're gonna apply rules to them. You're gonna get as many as you can that way because they're quick. They don't take forever to run. Then you'll move into the brute forces. So what this will do is it'll get anything that was randomly generated up to probably realistically the 10 character space once you start using GPUs. And then once you have those, you can start analyzing them with pack or whatever you want to do. You could do it on your own too and create custom character sets. And then once you do that, you create your masks and then you run your mask attacks. One thing I didn't include on here is after you do that, you dump them all and create your custom password list. Then the next time you go to do an audit, you start off by running through all the repeat offenders. So let's talk about the hardware that it takes to do all this. So, and I'll kind of run you through the progression at the way we upgraded through our hardware. So when we first started it, I came back from training and was like, we're going to do a password audit. It'll be great. And my boss was like, sure, go do a password audit. Correct passwords. I was like, sweet. So all I had at the time was like a VM with Kali Linux on it. So I was able to get a dump of our Active Directory environment. And I slapped it on there, and all I had was the processor to run. So that being said, I used John the Ripper for the first one. Like I said, this could be anything. It doesn't have to be a VM. It could be just old and busted desktop, anything. So you'll be surprised. I didn't think I'd get that much just because I didn't have any power behind it. But when we did this first initial test, I was able to get over 60% of all the passwords in the domain. And when that happened, management was like, oh, wow, we might have a problem. So that's when we decided we're going to get a little more serious about it. And they were talking about doing, regular password audits, things like that. And when that happens, we decided, well, maybe we'll step up our game a little bit. Let's try to use Hashcat. It's a little more efficient. Let's get a system with the GPU. So we upgraded. So this is the OG++. Nothing special. It was a Dell Precision. It had a NVIDIA Quadro GPU. It's like 1,300 CUDA cores. I think the system only cost us about $1,500, so it wasn't expensive at all. You're still going to struggle to do brute forces with this thing, just because the power's not there. You'll be able to get through dictionary attacks faster. You can use some of the bigger rule sets with bigger dictionaries and get through them in a reasonable amount of time. Regardless, this will get you into the Hashcat territory and get you prepared for what happens next. And that's when you start improving. You want to step up your game a little bit more. And this is what we, and apparently everybody else who has one, has affectionately started calling the Kraken. So what the Kraken is just a big 4U server chassis. It's got 2 Intel Xeon processors in it. It's got ours has 4 NVIDIA GTX 1080 Ti's. So that being said, most of the credit for this idea goes to the NetMux blog on how to build a password cracking rig. We saw that blog, and he's like, oh, yeah, you can do this for like $7,000. We're like, sweet, let's do it. So what we changed here is the graphics cards. I think he was running 1070s. And at the time, the 1080 Ti's had just come out, where I was like, let's go for it. So we went ahead and did that. We went ahead and got that. So what this is going to do is put us into serious brute force territory. With the additional attacks that you're able to do with all these GPUs, which I think added up to 14,336 CUDA cores. So we started improving, right? I had the 60% on our first password audit. Then we started improving. We got it down to under 40% of passwords cracked using dictionaries. And then when we got this, it kind of wiped out that progress. So it's pretty significant once you start being able to do different types of attacks. And then just for fun, I've got the benchmark comparison between the OG++ and the Kraken. So for those of you who aren't familiar with these kind of benchmarks, MHS is millions of hashes per second, and GHS is billions of hashes per second. So with NTLM, the Kraken is actually getting 200 and almost 9 billion hashes per second operations. And then, if nobody's watching your corporate card, you can get a little crazy and order a Brutalis from Sakita. These things start at $22,000. You can fit 8 GPUs in them, and they do offer 1080 Ti's now. You get 3 terabytes of RAM, 18 terabytes of solid-state storage. The question?
A lot.
A lot. It's actually really hot, too. So, right. So things you can do when you're not cracking passwords, right? There is something to be said, though, about diminishing returns. Like I said, once you get to a certain password length, which is like 15 characters, it just becomes unrealistic to brute force passwords. So, I mean, what's half of eternity? I mean, so once you step up from 4 1080 Ti's to 8 1080 Ti's, it's really not that much of a difference. So if you want to be cost effective, you might consider just a Kraken. But I don't know. Maybe you have a use case for a Brutalis. And here's the fun. These are with 1080 Ti's. It's 513 billion hashes a second. All right, and now I will turn it over to Doug. Talk a little bit more about how you report it to the business.
All right, cool. So you had a bunch of fun. You were wearing your hoodie. You were playing the black hat. You got your cool, like, V for Vendetta mask. You cracked all the passwords. Now you got to go business. You got to ditch the hoodie for some slacks and a button-up and start having meetings. So the first thing to do is have meetings with department heads and management. So first you want to go to your manager so that they can kind of set the stage for everybody else. They can have some meetings and say, hey, look, bad stuff is coming. We cracked a lot of passwords. Give them kind of the heads up so that they know what's going to go on. So if there's any blowback from it, it's going to come back to them. Then you can also look at some trends, right? So you want to have meetings with department heads for outliers. So maybe you can organize all of your cracked passwords and look at it by department. And maybe you find that the finance department, for instance, had a very low crack rate. Maybe it was 2%, whereas like the entire enterprise was 60 to 70%. Go meet with that finance department head. Say, you know what, kudos to you. Like, maybe we've got some money in the budget. We're going to throw a pizza party for you guys. Like, we only cracked 2% of your passwords, and we got over half of the enterprise. You guys are really doing something great. Keep up the good work. On the other side of it, maybe you find a department where you've cracked 90% of the passwords. We'll call marketing. You go to the marketing department head and you say, hey, you got a real problem here, guys. We only cracked 60%, which was still significant of the enterprise, but we got 90% of your passwords. So maybe that department head can have some conversations with their employees. Maybe there's password reuse going on. Maybe somebody got a really good idea and was like, hey, this is my secure password. I'm going to use that too. And now everybody's using this super secure password. So they can have some conversations around that. So definitely reward people and recognize for people for good password habits and have conversations around bad password habits as well. But you're also going to end up meeting with some middle managers, kind of discussing the findings, what you found, and kind of your recommendations moving forward. The first recommendation that you're really going to have to really be effective with this, you want to force password resets. There's going to be two categories where you're going to have to fight, two kind of fronts where you're going to have to fight this battle. So the first is going to be on the user side. That might be a little bit easier to have that conversation. We're going to send out an email and let everybody know we cracked these passwords, and we're just going to carte blanche say, everybody, we're going to reset your passwords and start over again. You're probably not going to come up with too much resistance for that as long as you communicate it and everybody's aware of what's happening. Users are probably going to be okay. Unfortunately, the real problem that you're going to have is system accounts, service accounts. Ultimately, we would like to see those reset immediately because otherwise they're just going to keep showing in our report quarterly. Every quarter we're going to see these same service accounts. The only problem is nobody knows what these service accounts do. They log into 15 different servers and they only know about 9 of the servers that they log into. And nobody wants to touch it because everything works, and if you touch it, then it breaks. So if you can, try to put pressure to get those changed. Usually those are so old that like they may not even be complying with your current password baseline. And if that's the case, then that may be a use case that you can use to kind of put some pressure on business to make the change. Like, hey, look, we've got this password. We found it. We cracked it. This doesn't even meet our minimum standards for passwords today. This password wouldn't even be able to be created today. So you need to change it. They still might tell you to go fly a kite, but at least you got some ammo behind you. The next thing you want to do is user education. So the way we did this was a security fair. So we had a live security fair. We hosted it in a room. We brought everybody down. We had several different stations for various aspects of enterprise security. One of those booths happened to be password security. So brought everybody into the password security booth, showed them all our statistics about how many passwords we cracked, had some conversations with people about passwords that we cracked. It was pretty effective. People are interested in this. People want to know. People want to get better. So that was pretty effective. You could also run like an online security fair. If you have more distributed workforce and you can't really gather everybody into a central location, it might make more sense to kind of run a webinar, something like that, where you can just kind of have a question and answer, maybe a little bit of interactive, where people can contribute, but at least then you can distribute it to the business. Another effective tool will be an awareness email. I think even if you do the security fair, the awareness email is probably a pretty good idea. Just kind of give people a general overview of what you did. Like, hey, especially the first time. Maybe you don't want to do this every time. Maybe annually you do it. But the first time it's very important. We cracked passwords. That's what we did. We wanted to see what our password health really looked like. And these were the statistics. It wasn't good. And then maybe at the bottom you can put some tips in there for like how to create better passwords. Maybe you tell them a little bit about how you crack passwords. They're going to think that's cool because they're like, oh, I'm learning Hacksaw tricks. And they get the benefit because they're going to create a more secure password out of it. So everybody kind of wins with that situation. So now we'll kind of go into some of our findings and some things that we saw as we were going through this. So the first thing to keep in mind, your password rules are failing you. Unfortunately, Microsoft Active Directory really hasn't done a lot of work in allowing you to create secure passwords. For the most part, you can define your minimum acceptable password length. You can check the box if you want a complex password. So I guess we'll talk about that, right? Let's talk about what a complex password is compared to Microsoft, right? So we have 4 categories. We need a lowercase character, an uppercase character, a digit, and a special character. Pick 3 of 4, right? That's going to be secure. Good. Okay, this is a bunch of your passwords right now, guaranteed. Spring 2017. I've got my uppercase character. I've got some lowercase characters in there. I have some digits. Oh, man, that's a 10-character password. I'm 2 over the minimum. I'm doing great. That's awesome. Unfortunately, everybody's using this password. It's in RockU. It gets found every time. So you think, okay, well, let's do it more secure then. I'm going to make them do 4 of 4. That'll be good. Let's do a special character, too. Crap. So that's really not going to do you any good either. So the real take-home from this is Active Directory, Microsoft, they're not going to be able to provide you the tools that you need to create secure passwords. To really get this into a point where you can create some rules and standards around it, you're going to have to start looking to third-party tools. There's a lot of different companies out there that do these types of things. The key features that you want to look at are like blacklists. So after you run your first password audit, go through and look at the top 50 words maybe, and put those into a password blacklist. So if a user tries to create a password with Spring in it, you say, no, it's not going to happen. Winter, nope, not going to happen. The company name, nope, not going to happen. So and eventually, they'll have to create a password that's not in that top 50. But then next time we run the audit, we find the next top 50, we add that to the blacklist, and we keep getting more secure as we iterate through the process. Another thing to look for, if possible, would be to kind of look at entropy, or the difference between the passwords, the difference between old and new. The only problem you're going to run into with something like this that we've seen is that you're going to actually store hashes somewhere else that may be less secure than your domain controller. So if you're going to do this, the tool is going to have to be in a secure zone that is as secure as your domain controller, because it's got to have the old hash to compare the new hash to see how different they really are. But if you can do that and you have a place to put it, it's probably really good. Ultimately, users are going to follow the path of least resistance. So I'm going to give them a set of instructions to create a password. They're going to create a password that meets only those specifications, and then they're going to go on with their life. Not any knock on users, but they got more important things to do, right? They don't care about passwords. They want to crunch numbers. They want to create marketing emails. They want to do all the things that makes the business money. They want to have a password that's easy to remember. Every time they log in, it's quick, it's done, it's easy. So I guess the takeaway here is that users aren't going to go above and beyond. Don't expect that. If you have 3 standards, don't expect your users to adhere to 7 standards. They're going to do the 3, and that 3 standards should be a secure password. So if you're allowing standards that create insecure passwords, then that's going to be a problem. Ultimately, your mileage is going to vary here. So if you're not forcing password resets, maybe you can't get management to buy into that. It's too disruptive to users. Nobody wants to change their passwords. We're going to have a bunch of people angry about it. And you just kind of let it go. You will see a lot of users that change their passwords, especially if you can communicate in a direct way. We cracked your password. We saw it. We know what it is. A lot of people are going to change their passwords. What they're going to change them to, that may or may not be more secure. Maybe they're just changing the digit at the end, and we're going to crack it again next quarter. You're going to see a lot of repeat offenders as you start iterating through this on a quarterly basis. Those people that are only changing it by a digit or just rotating things around. Maybe they're substituting digits for letters. That's the thing that the rules are going to catch. Those people are going to show up in your same reports. If you start seeing a lot of repeat offenders from like same departments, again, start mentioning that as in like department head meetings. So maybe third quarter back, you're coming back and you're saying, hey, you all are improving, but of the people that aren't improving, it's just the same people. I mean, we're not cracking new passwords. We're just cracking the same user over and over. So maybe that manager can go back and talk to that employee, talk to them about the importance of passwords, and maybe it can instill some more best practices there. Final note here, help desk isn't helping. So as we were doing our password cracking, we started seeing these common root words within business units. And we were like, why is everybody using the same word in their password? Couldn't figure it out. Then we talked to the help desk support, and we say, hey, when you reset a password, what do you reset it to? Oh, it's that root word. So people are getting their password reset by the help desk to welcome 2017, and then when the password needs to be reset, they're changing it to welcome bang 2017 or something like that. So user has a new password. They're, again, taking the path of least resistance, making a small modification to change their password. That's why entropy really is an important thing to look for in the third-party tool. So again, if you can't get something that's going to monitor entropy on your passwords, at least have a conversation with your help desk. Maybe instill some best practices around that. Not give out the same type of root word passwords. At least maybe rotate them quarterly. Or if you can, just give out a random password when they have to reset passwords. So some more things we found. Length matters, right? So of everything that we looked at, the single most important thing to make a password more complex, harder to crack, is length. Guaranteed. Complexity rules don't matter. Length matters more than anything. A 25-character password that's all lowercase, that's not a dictionary word or a combination of dictionary words, is going to be a lot harder to crack than like a 7-character password that's truly randomly generated. Because with the brutality, or with the Kraken, we can just crack the entire 7-character space in like minutes. So even if it's completely randomly generated at 7 characters, it's still not secure. So you want to try to get your length up. So if you can create baselines around longer minimum passwords, that's a good practice. Or at least just educating users. If they're trying to think about how they're going to create the password, the number one thing that they should be considering is how long is their password. So they want to create it long but also easy to remember. We also talked a little bit about password length here. So these statistics are a little bit old. I mean, you see Radeon 6970. So the technology is a little old. The trends still follow. You're going to get to a certain point where you're cracking everything really super quick, and then it's just going to go off the charts. So you're going to go from like minutes to days to weeks to eternity, and you're just not going to be able to crack those passwords. So that's why we say that the length is really the most important thing. The next thing is special characters aren't created equally. As Nick alluded to earlier, there are 33 characters in the special character space that's assigned by Hashcat. These are all the special characters, curly braces, square braces, all the things. However, when we looked at passwords, of the passwords that included special characters, 90% of those special characters were those 5 characters: bang, at, pound, dollar, and star. So why bother looking through the other 33 characters, or the other, well, I don't know, 28 characters, when all you really need to do is look at 5? So if 90% of people that use a special character are using those 5 special characters, that's so cost effective you can add that to every mask that you use. So that's what we did. So we had like upper, lower, digit, right? So we just made it upper, that special character space, lower, the special character space, and just added it in a possibility for every character, and we cracked a ton of passwords. So Hashcat allows for that. You can create custom character spaces. So create your custom character space with those 5 characters, and really those are the ones that are even worth looking at, and just add it into all your masks. Kind of a tangent from that is that special characters might actually be making your passwords less secure. Since 90% of passwords are using the same 5 characters, if you're telling users to use special characters, they're picking a character out of essentially a 5-character space. So you're not increasing complexity or making the passwords any more secure by enforcing special characters. I guess you could add that to your blacklist if you wanted to still include special characters, and maybe you get more variance in the special characters that show up in the cracks. Another thing to consider here is practical considerations. So if you're going to have this massive cracking rig, this is going to become the crown jewels of your enterprise, right? So like you're going to have all the hashes. You're going to have plain text passwords. You're going to have the capability to crack hashes. And if I'm an attacker and I find your cracking rig, I mean, like, game over, right? So you really want to put some tight security controls around that. If you want to, the way we do it is we completely air gap it from the network. It's not connected to anything. We have to go down to a room that's isolated. There's a sign-in, sign-out physical access log to it. We log into it and do all our work down there. It's kind of a pain. We're kind of considering that at this point because of the second point here, environmental. This thing runs hot, very, very hot. Kind of a funny story about that. So we got the Kraken, and we're like, all right, we got it. We're building it. Everything's awesome. We got our cards in there. We're going to do a super cool overnight attack, see how many passwords we can get. All right, let her rip. So we leave, and we come back in the morning, and it turns out facilities had actually gotten a heat complaint about the floor that we were on because we were running a little bit too hot. So we kind of had to rework that a little bit and take out some drop ceiling tiles to improve the airflow a little bit. But it's going to be super hot. So if you're doing security controls where it's physical access, hands-on keyboards only, maybe wear shorts that day because you're going to be pretty hot. Obviously you could restrict it in other ways, IP restrictions, certificate-based auth, things like that. So that kind of falls into the operational task. How are you going to do this? Do you want to sit down hands-on keyboard next to a furnace for a couple hours, or do you want to try to sacrifice security in some ways so that you can actually access it from your desk and do tasks more comfortably? Surprise, Linux graphic drivers suck. If anybody's ever dealt with a new graphics card in Linux, it's a pain in the butt. When we got it, the first thing we did was we just tried to do Kali Linux. We said, all right, we're just going to throw Kali on there. Kali says, I don't know what the hell this thing is. I'm not going to work. Oh, okay, cool. So we'll do Ubuntu 16.04. Try that. All right, here we go. Here's your new thing, long-term release. Yeah, I don't know what to do that either. Okay, great. So we finally went back to 14.04 for the bleeding edge cards, and they had supported drivers. I'm sure now at this point you can probably do Kali or 16.04 with 1080 Ti's. But if you're looking at this a few months down the road and you're creating your cracking rig with like whatever the bleeding edge card is at the time, know that that's going to be a problem and you might have a little bit of trouble with your operating system choices. Again, so people are really going to be surprised. During the security fairs that we did, we had a lot of, password badasses, I guess, that came through. They were like, there's no way you got my password. It's the best password around. And we're like, yeah, we got it. They're like, oh, shit. So then they keep coming back, and they're like, oh, well, I changed it. Do you have it now? Yeah, we got it. So a lot of people are going to be surprised. They have things and tricks that they've been doing for a long time to use to create passwords that they think are secure but are actually not secure.
On that note, we also had a kind of like a banner scrolling screen of all of the worst passwords in the enterprise. It was like the top 50 or 60 worst passwords. And it was pretty hilarious. People would come up and be like, oh, man, that's my password. That's good, right? No. So, yeah, that was it was comical for sure. And then, you know, to his point, you had password badasses that would come up, and then they'd type their name in, and then they'd get mad at you. Like, I had a guy yell at me for 20 minutes saying there's no way I could have cracked his password. And then after I told him, like, well, I'm not going to bring your password up on the screen in front of all these people, then he went and yelled at my manager for another 20 minutes.
So the other people that are going to be surprised by this is management. And that's what we found most often. So like Nick said, he went to a SANS training, said, hey, look, we can crack passwords. It's really not that hard. It's not as hard as everybody seems to think it is. Let's give it a shot. Management says, yeah, go do whatever, kid. I don't care. And then you come back and say, hey, here's 60% of the enterprise passwords. And they're like, oh, shit. So then as you start iterating through this and they realize that it's a problem, the wallet starts opening up and you start getting more and more funding, and then eventually you can get up to the point of the Kraken. We haven't impressed management enough for a Brutalis yet, but maybe it's coming. We'll see. That's really all we've got. Just open it up to questions here. Sure.
This is really good. My only question is, was there any accounting for like the value of a specific account?
Yep.
Yeah, to a certain extent, right? So I agree and I disagree, right? So that is important, and we did account for a lot of the admin passwords. We do use a password control program that's going to have large passwords completely randomly generated. So a lot of those accounts that we have under that control aren't in play. But the thing is the intern in accounting has an account that also has a local admin password that's shared across the enterprise. So maybe you don't care about the intern in finance's password, but once I have the intern in finance password, I can get on, run Mimikatz, dump all the passwords in memory, and now I have a local admin password, and I have.
Not if you're using that tool that you guys own for that
Well, yeah, if only.
Should be randomizing
Well,
local admin, which is
if only, right? In the best of
In
cases.
a perfect world, maybe.
In the best.
I've seen 120,000. I don't think you have that many.
Yeah. No. I mean, it's certainly possible. It's just sometimes it's a struggle. Yeah.
But I mean, as far as like the service accounts, let's say, right, that maybe aren't under management
Yep.
today, for example, they don't all have the same value, right? A service account that is scoped effectively, runs the service exactly what it's supposed to do, very little value for an attacker.
Yeah.
It's the one that was created with domain admin rights that was then used in 14 places, like you were describing.
Sure. Yeah, but that's the problem. Is that 90% of the service accounts are in the latter, not the former.
Right.
Because people, I mean, like security is kind of an afterthought like 10 years ago, right? Nobody cared about security. Like, I need to get this POC running, so I need domain admin. It's got to get everything.
Right.
So those accounts are going to be everywhere. That's going to be the most common service account. Of course, in the ideal security bubble that we create, where we say we have this security, this service account, it can only access these subset of servers and only these services upon it. Yeah, for sure, that's good, but that's just not the case. I mean, even in the best of cases now, there's still POCs that get spun up, and there's like, I need an account today, give me domain admin, and sometimes
Well,
you just.
Yeah, and then to that point, when you go to present your findings to management, you should be running those kind of reports, right? You should be like, well, we cracked these passwords. How many of them do we like really need to focus on to fix them? Who do we need to communicate to fix them? And that all comes out there. You'll have giant spreadsheets with columns and all that. For what it's worth, those tools will spit out those reports for you.
What's your experience with like passphrases, extra length in terms of cracking those?
Yeah, so passphrases are good depending on how many words are in your phrase, right? So if it's a two-word phrase, then the combinator attack's going to just crush it, right? But I mean, if you're creating a passphrase where it's like several words long, especially if you've got a delimiter in there, you're going to have a lot more success with that. I would assume, I guess with more CUDA cores, higher combinator attacks where you're just running like multiple word lists with like different delimitors are possible. But again, then you're going to start getting into the point where like somebody's investing $30,000 to kind of crack your passwords.
I was also, what I'm trying to emphasize was trying to make it unique, something that they would think you were just going to say.
Right.
Yeah, if it's in a dictionary, it's going to get it anyways, right? So.
How many times do you get the passphrase correct for establishing?
I have not yet cracked that one.
I'm still saying.
It's probably in Megatron, though.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, most of the users in the company probably don't know that particular
But
cartoon.
it's probably been cracked at some point. Sure. Yeah, we're actually having those conversations right now in the enterprise. Is there a password length that we would be comfortable with saying, users, if you create a password of this length, that we're never going to make your password expire, or maybe expire annually? I think that's a great idea. I think users love that. I think they're going to create more secure passwords. The caveat there is I don't know that I would give it eternal expiration because of password compromise, right? So if I tell a user, if you create a 25-character password, you never have to reset your password. Guess what? That 25-character password is Gmail. It's their bank account. It's LinkedIn. It's everything because they have a super secure password now, right? So then LinkedIn gets popped. It goes into the password list, and then the 25-character password's garbage. So I think an annual expiration on like a large password is probably a good idea. I think everybody feels pretty good about that.
What is the most secure technique for generating a password?
I mean, as long as you're actually doing true randomization, I mean, not even true randomization, right? Like, if you're running like KeyPass or something where it generates passwords based on entropy during setup or whatever, where it's truly like no human interaction, like some are upper, some are lower, some are digits, some are special, that's really the best way to go. Password management really is a good tool here, because then we can create a giant, massive password that we only have to remember that one, and then generate all of our other passwords. It can be 64 characters, truly random.
Well, and then to another thing on that. So I think it was Mubix who just came out with a blog about, you know, the sweet spot for password length, and I think it was 26, maybe 27 characters, somewhere in that range, where Hashcat won't even, it just can't crack it, period. So if you're at that length, it's just not going to happen. Just Hashcat can't get that big.
I think we're actually out of time, but we'll hang around up here in the front. We're going to give time to the next presenters. We'll hang around up here up front. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them in the bar.